So there's this lighthouse that you can see from my house, and my mom used to tell me a story about a woman who used to live there. No one lives in it now, but there used to be this young woman in her 20s who lived there like 30 years ago. Apparently she came from a really broken home. Her mom and sister died in a horrible car crash, and her dad was an abusive drug addict. So the harbor master let her live in the lighthouse and paid her a small salary for taking care of it. So she had been living there for a couple months, and that's when she noticed weird things starting to happen. Some of her belongings would occasionally go missing. Like one time she couldn't find her flashlight and she looked for it everywhere. And finally she found it under her bed, which was weird because she knew she had never put it there. But then weirder stuff started to happen. So at this point she had been living at the lighthouse for like 6 months, and she was getting pretty creeped out because bizarre things started happening. She started noticing that some of her food was going missing, but she was the only person who lived in the lighthouse, obviously, and she was really specific about what food she bought when she went grocery shopping. She went to the grocery store at the beginning of each week, and for example, she would always buy 7 apples, one for each day of the week. And she was always really precise about that. But there were a few Sundays where she didn't have any apples left by the end of the week, which didn't make any sense because she always counted at the grocery store to make sure she had 7 apples. So she started getting more and more creeped out, but she didn't want to say anything because she had nowhere else to live. And then one night she woke up in the middle of the night to something touching her feet at the end of her bed. So she woke up in the middle of the night to something tickling her feet, and she was really freaked out, obviously. So she jumped out of bed and turned all the lights in the lighthouse on. But when the lights came on, there was nothing there. She checked through the whole lighthouse and couldn't find anything. Nothing like that ever happened again, but she never slept well after that. She stayed in the lighthouse for like 5 more months, but eventually she found a new place to live, got a new job. She ended up moving to an entirely different state. And then one day, like a year later, she's at work, sitting at her desk, and she's going through old pictures on her phone. And she finds an album on her phone called You at Night. And she's thinking, what? I do not remember making this album. So she clicks into it and she gasps because all the pictures in the album are of her sleeping in her old bed at the lighthouse. When I was 16, my friend Lexi and I were trying to get super fit one summer. So we made a pact that we were going to swim around this one rock every day that summer. The swim wasn't that long. It only took like 15 minutes. But the rule was that you had to swim around the backside of the rock. You couldn't just go out and back. You had to go behind it. And the backside of the rock was always a little scary because once you got behind the rock, no one on the beach could see you anymore. So if anything happened to you, you'd be on your own. But we were ridiculously intense about it. Like we went turbo beast mode. We said that no matter the weather, no matter the size of the waves, the strength of the rip current, we would swim around the rock for the entire month of July every day. And we were super serious about this commitment. Like one day, Lexi ate a really bad pepperoni calzone and had the worst food poisoning. And she was literally shitting her pants. And I was like, Lexi, you don't have to swim with me today. And she still swam with me that day. But then one day, in the middle of July 16th actually to be exact, because I remember, we were swimming around the rock and something bad happened. So Lexi and I are swimming, and we're like halfway through the swim on the backside of the rock. And while we're swimming, something hits me on the back. It literally felt like someone punched me underwater. And I scream, and Lexi's like, what happened? But I was freaked out and I didn't explain it to her, so I just told her to swim to the rock, get out of the ocean, and get on top of it. Once we were safe on the rock, I told Lexi what had happened, and she was super freaked out, and I actually had a red mark on my back, so she knew I wasn't making any of it up. We stayed on the rock, staring at the water, trying to spot anything moving for like 30 minutes. But after a while, we were like, okay, well, we have to swim back at some point. So we decided to swim in. We literally swam as fast as we could back to the shore. When we got to the shore, there was an old woman on the beach looking at us kind of weirdly. She's like, where's your other friend? And we were confused. We were like, what? She's like, you had a third girl swimming with you, didn't you? And we were like, no, it's just us. And she's like, well, I definitely saw a third girl out there with you guys. But then a few days later, the local newspaper came out with a story titled Something in the Water. People at another beach a few miles away claimed that they were getting hit by something in the water. So people were claiming at this other beach in town that something was hitting them in the water. And they couldn't see what it was, but a few people had described the same sensation. The feeling of a really hard, blunt kind of punch in the water. So Lexi and I start to suspect that whatever's hitting people at that beach also hit me a few days earlier. And even though it was only July 19th, Lexi and I decided that it wasn't safe to swim behind the rock anymore. But I still would obviously go to the beach, and my favorite time to go was early in the mornings. And usually it would just be me at the beach at that time of day, but one morning I came down and the same old lady that thought that there had been a third girl swimming with us that one afternoon was standing there on the shore of the beach. She was just standing there with her feet in the water, but when I walked by, she turned around and she goes, it must be a beautiful life out there. I bet they're happy. And then she bent down and picked something up from the sand and handed it to me. It was a type of shell that I had seen all the time. And she goes, do you know what these are? These are mermaid nails. We must have one living nearby this summer. And then she winks. A few nights later, I was at the beach again at a beach fire. And that's when I made a huge mistake.